That's one of the things I've lamented, and the other is, um, you know, are we? And the convention as a whole has to ask itself, do we want to be fundamentalist or do we want to be evangelical?
Yeah.
And I think there's strident differences between those. A fundamentalist is always looking for and all of those are loaded terms, so I feel like I should clarify a little bit of that. A fundamentalist is always looking for who is next to be excluded, who does not fit. And the one of the lines that I heard couple of years ago at the SBC was, in the auditorium or somewhere, was, well, when you do a big enough tent, you're going to end up with some clowns. And but do we want to? Is the goal to restrict to the point where there's only going to be like Founders and the CBN left, and eventually they'll turn on each other, because that's what you do when you're always looking for the next enemy. You will eventually turn on your friends. And the other side is not, and it's not like a naivete, to say, should the convention be evangelical? When I say that, evangelical isn't a voting term. It is grounded in convictions. It's grounded in kind of theological presuppositions, but it's also willing to say, what are the healthy boundaries of cooperation where you and I may not have to be uniform in order for us to partner? And I think that's the tension point in the convention, is that, and I'll say this. I mean, the far right elements in the convention, the Founders, the CBN crowd, this is going to get me in trouble.
That's okay. They're not going to listen because it's hosted by a woman. They're not going to listen.
So, I mean,
right? So exactly. It's a podcast hosted by a woman, so they're automatically not going to listen.
Yeah. I would say they are the Yorkie of the SBC. They make a lot of noise.
Yeah.
They drum up a lot of drama on Twitter.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the actual business that matters, they have lost more than Louisville lost last year. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That is a lot. They have been soundly and roundly outvoted every time.
Yeah.
And it's because I fully believe the convention as a whole is not fooled. We may have some convictions, and I think the some of the proposals that were coming up on the floor and happening around it are going to be helpful, because the very definition of Southern Baptist cooperation, and to your listeners who may not be familiar with who we are, the Southern Baptist Convention is not a creedal. We do not have a statement of faith that is binding on the churches. Our churches are.
But don't you think the Baptist faith and message is becoming that? I think in theory that's the ideal, but I think that's part of what Rick was saying. Like, this is not being Southern Baptist, regardless of where you land on theologically.
Right. I would say so. I would say it is. Yeah. I would say it is turning that way, and it's and that's where I think it's going to have to be. We have to be careful how we approach the next 12 months ahead of Indianapolis, because as significant as New Orleans was, Indianapolis is where this gets etched in granite. And that is where I think over the next 12 months we have to, the definition of cooperation is in the Constitution, a statement of faith or faith and practice that is closely aligned with the convention's stated.
Yeah.
It was a question that got asked last year in Anaheim: how close is close enough?
Right.
And And I think that is one that has to get asked, especially now that we've started to include this language of, adding a potential constitutional amendment. So there are a handful of stated examples that a church would fall out of cooperation if they have these. They've been responses to, not even doctrine; it's been practice, and it's sinful practice. So it has to do with sex abuse. It has to do with racism.
Yeah.
It has to do with homosexuality. That would automatically kind of say, okay, we've been pretty clear where we are on these. And while I am all about clarity, because again, this doesn't make the press, but the earliest discussions when the convention adopted the statement of faith in 2000, with statements from committee members that were on it, were that they were this idea of the office of pastor is reserved for qualified men only spoke to the lead pastor in a church, or a senior pastor, to use the 20th century language.
Yeah.
And so since then, it's kind of gotten broadened out to, well, what is that? Now, rather than get into the constitutional nuance of that, it's an ecclesiological problem that churches are using a word for positions that may, it's just it's sloppy ecclesiology. I think that's what I think, and you can't fix sloppy ecclesiology by like automatically lumping all of this together.
Yeah.
Because for 20 years, and I heard it while I was an MDiv student at Southern, that it was speaking specifically about this office.
Yeah.
And did they mean something different by that? Should we look at, but this goes back to just whole discussions of what it means to call someone a pastor. Do you just call someone a pastor because they do ministry work?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
And I would say, this is a whole nother conversation maybe we'll have down the road. Do you call someone there are senior pastors who are not pastoral. They're not pastoring either.
Right.
They're CEOs.
Right.
And so,
Right.
we broadly apply that term in multiple ways. I had Scott McKnight on the podcast, and we talked about is as part of the Pastors in Power series, are senior pastors biblical? And what, like, even models, of governance. That was a fun one. Y'all can check out. But
I bet.
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, you were in, one of the things I saw on social media, there was a lot coming out of New Orleans, right? From all over the place, right? And so one of the things I was seeing was, first of all, this whole thing about, are they going to oust Saddleback, and why and who, and all that stuff. And then the other couple churches that were in that vote as well. And or that package of things. And then I started talking about the sexual abuse stuff. And it was like, what I was hearing, or people were reporting, was, oh, the Southern Baptists are more concerned about kicking out women than about sex abusers. You were in the room where it happened. What's your sense of general Baptistness around that statement? Is that even remotely accurate? Or is it, again, there's a few who are leading things and they're giving it a bad name?
I would say it is not accurate to say that we were more concerned about ousting Saddleback than addressing sex abuse.
Yeah, I know you personally. I mean, it can't be we all, because you are even if you were the only one.
Yeah,
I know that you're not more concerned about kicking women out than sexual abuse.
I think there's so the whole discussion of sex abuse in the SBC that could be its whole own episode. What I think happened that is slowing down any meaningful progress is, I will say it, I think there's some bad actors who, let's be honest, any organization with billions of dollars in assets, thousands of people with jobs and connections. There's always going to be a political mindset to it. It's one of the things that is kind of the gross underbelly of denominational life, is that there are kind of these backroom discussions.
And I think a protection of the institution. I mean,
yes.
Some of the committee members, even last year when they're about the report and stuff, it's like, well, we shouldn't release this because we start becoming concerned with liability.
Right.
And it's not just the SBC. I know that.
Oh yeah. And that's where the obstacle for any significant change has always been, there is not escalating liability in the SBC because we're not a top-down hierarchy. So when the executive committee is kind of wrestling with what do they do with it, 901 Commerce Street in Nashville has no authority over us. They work for me as a pastor. They work for First Baptist Fairview Heights. It's not the other way around. And so it makes kind of these discussions difficult. And so taking, a convention of almost 50,000 churches that has no kind of centralized structure and trying to figure out how do we work meaningful change into it, is going to be, and I hate to say it, it's going to take a decade probably to figure all of this out, because there's so many issues. There's institutional protection, there's bad actors, and then there's just a lot of it that is a very complicated structure. And so, the task force that Bart appointed last year brought some meaningful things together to the floor that were overwhelmingly, I wouldn't say unanimous. From where we were sitting, it was kind of hard to see the back of the auditorium, but it was overwhelmingly in favor of what they were proposing. So there is a ministry check database that is put together. It's not enough, but it's a significant step. The hard thing is going to be that there is an intentional misinformation of what it means to be credibly accused.